So here we are, we're all together to listen, think, analyze, contemplate, internalize to the degree that makes sense to us. I always say it, we are the boss, not Buddha. So I'm going to go blah, blah, blah about what Buddha says through the lenses of Tibetan tradition, in particular through the lenses of Tsongkhapa, the 14th ways of presenting. Here is compassion. We're going to listen to these things and take, what's that noise? Scrapey noise. Oh, it's me. I heard it last night. What was it? Oh, how boring. Can't we stop static? You mean it's my problem? What? No, it's too complicated. It's not in the right position. It's too far away. Or it's too close, So we'll see how we go. Okay, so listen, think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize, whatever. Why? Because we're talking about how here, the overt thing is how to help others. But as we discussed very clearly, hopefully clearly last night, we've got to help ourselves first. You can't have compassion for others until we, as we would say in the West, have compassion for ourselves, which is what the fundamentals of the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teaching are about. Changing our own mind, seeing our own suffering, understanding why we suffer, which is why we harm others, which is why we don't have much compassion. So as His Holiness Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And as Lama Zopa puts it, meaning well is not enough. And we're going to look at that here. You've got to have wisdom, So we're going to listen to this so we can develop these marvelous qualities, which the Buddha says everyone possesses, for our own sake and the sake of others. And we'll just sing a little prayer in Tibetan. I don't know, Mary, stick it on the screen. Could you do the refuge prayer? So anyone wants to join in, you're very welcome. That's it. Yeah, I'll sing it in Tibetan. So we're saying, the first two lines are saying, until we are enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If you feel like you're a Buddhist, you can have that thought. And the second one is what I just said before, but in a shorter way. So by the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha in order to benefit sentient beings. So thinking that way. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chonyen gi personan ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chonyen gi personan ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shok. We actually should have started, and I should have let Brenda do it. Need a little mandala. So we'll offer, on behalf of the center, and everybody's going to offer a mandala, the universe, basically, all the contents of the universe, thinking you're offering it to the Buddha as a request for the teachings.
This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Idam.
O holy and perfect pure Lama.
Okay. So summarizing last night, and we'll carry it, and then we'll go into more detail today. If we look at this packaging of the teachings in the Tibetan tradition, the different styles, the Kargyupas have one way, the Nyingmapas another, Gelugpas another, but essentially it's all this coming to the same thing. And really it's these different packagings, and in the Gelugpas we call it the Lam Rim, this gradual path, this course basically, taking all of Buddha's teachings and presenting it in an orderly way according to the capacity of the disciple, which is how you learn anything. You start with the simple stuff, you go to the more advanced, and you get to the most advanced. Well, within that framework, compassion is the most advanced, which is surprising to us because we tend to think that's the doorway into a spiritual path. And we made this point last night very clearly, that to develop this level of compassion that Buddha is asserting in the Mahayana path that we can all cultivate. There's no way in the universe you can have that until you've got it for yourself. And they don't call it self-compassion. That's our term in the West. We kind of get it. It's the work of working on your mind, understanding karma, abiding by the laws of karma, understanding your own suffering, and understanding its causes. This is the Four Noble Truths. That's the first one. That's a prerequisite. that prepares you to enter into the more advanced levels of developing this extraordinary compassion, this courageous compassion of the bodhisattvas, not just, as I said last night, for the innocent victim, which tends to be the only compassion that arises spontaneously in our hearts, but it's compassion for every single sentient being, the harmers, the pedophiles, the murderers, the victims, and even the happy people. Because we're using the reference point for the Buddha in compassion is the meaning of suffering. Compassion is may you not suffer. So by using Buddha's definition of suffering, which we get in the First Noble Truth, 3 levels of suffering, then when we start to grow that in ourselves and understand it, that informs our ability to have this, to develop this extraordinary levels of compassion, which all culminate in this marvelous attitude called bodhichitta. So I thought what we'd do is we'd go through, roughly speaking, just touch upon these kind of 11 little points. There's different ways of packaging that the Pabonka Rinpoche describes, starting with equanimity that lead us through the kindness of the mother, wanting others to be calm, wanting others to be happy, transforming our minds, exchanging self for others, Tonglen, that culminates in bodhicitta. We'll go through those points of how, step by step, and then we'll touch on the 8 verses, this outrageous kind of seemingly simple, sweet little verses that are expressing the really radical practice of the advanced bodhisattvas, which we can all try, of really being glad to have problems, because problems become grist for the mill for us to really grow our compassion. We have to understand that. We'll all have an opportunity every day for that. So we'll go into all these this weekend. But I thought what I'd do is just try to show how, like I said last night, the compassion we do have now is very limited, and how it actually, and how how that is limited because we haven't worked enough on our own minds. In other words, we haven't worked enough on our own attachment and our own anger and all the other delusions, which are what cause us suffering and cause us to be cut off from others and prevent our compassion. And therefore, even when we try to cultivate compassion, it's so limited that it ends up exhausting us. And let's look at the logic of that, because it's not evident to us. So generally speaking, when we think of compassion, we see a person suffering, and it's valid compassion. We have empathy. Oh my God, look at that poor dog. Look at that poor children. Look at those poor people in Ukraine. We usually only look at the Ukraine. If you're on the Russian side, then you feel sorry for the Russian boys. And if you're on the Ukrainian side, you feel sorry for the Ukrainians, but it's rare that we have compassion for both. So usually now we have compassion for a certain group of people. Usually they're innocent victims, but they've got to be innocent victims that suit our view. And it sounds mean, but it's like it is, So that level of compassion is very limited because it's still mixed completely with attachment. And that's what exhausts us. So this is what's really surprising. One of the commonest things that we experience in life that people have is, you're overwhelmed by compassion. You're overwhelmed by the suffering of the world. So we've got a certain amount of compassion, and then we keep seeing more suffering, and it's just too much for us. That's completely reasonable. Forget whether it even happens to you. When it happens to you too, it's even more powerful. So what is it that causes us to be exhausted? In other words, why aren't we like the bodhisattvas who never get exhausted? What is it that we lack? What is it we have to practice in order to become like these bodhisattvas? Like His Holiness Dalai Lama, we need him. He's such a perfect example. But we should join the dots, We've got to ask the question, there he is, this man. Okay, we say he's a Buddha, but never mind. He's a Tibetan person who, since he was 16, he was born in 35, so that's 45, that's 50, 51. Since he was 16, he was appointed the job to run Tibet. Excuse me. Then all the years of the build-up of the Chinese coming into his country, and then finally 59, it culminates in he had to leave the country, and all the years since then. So we can see, just even if you're not a Buddhist, anybody with half a brain can see, he never stopped since then working to help sentient beings. First the Tibetans, but now anybody on the planet. He works diplomatically, socially, politically. He works with the scientists, he works with psychologists, he works with religious people. He never seems to give up. But what is evident, I think, to everybody, he's perky and happy. So that we ought to look at that. We get overwhelmed by the suffering in our own family, forget about the world. And we ought to join, we don't join the dots. So we have to ask the question, what is it that he has done that makes him somehow never give up and remain peaceful and relaxed in the face of such nightmares? And that's the point. So sometimes we can just put pedestal, oh, well, that's just the Dalai Lama. Well, that's insulting to the Dalai Lama, you know. I mean, if he is what he is, excuse me, I blow my nose. I did blow my nose. I thought when I left that about give up allergies. New York got them. I'm crying about 47 different medicines, different cocktails of them, some at night, some in the morning. I sweep the shelves of CVS. Anyway, excuse me. So, yeah, we shouldn't, it's insulting. I mean, if the Dalai Lama is what he is, they say he's a Buddha. He doesn't need a body. He doesn't need a boring old body. He's done the job. He's out of samsara. But he chooses, because of his compassion, this is the idea, to manifest as this particular human being who happens to be Tibetan, to show us the way, basically. You know. So he's the embodiment of the path. So when we know the technicalities of the path, first you control your mind and your body and speech and don't harm others. You abide by the laws of karma. You take responsibility. You work on your mind. You give up attachment. You give up delusions. Then you get renunciation. Then you go to then this is the first scope and second scope. Then you go to the compassion wing and you get bodhichitta. Then you do the 6 perfections. Then you realize emptiness and you become a Buddha. The entire path. Well, let's assume he's done that. And now he's able to manifest in different bodies. In this case, it's Tibetan man, to show us he's the example of it. It's exactly like if you want to learn tennis, you look at Federer, you look at these people who are embodiment of tennis, and you go, that's how I'd like to be. You don't just go, oh, wow, isn't Federer amazing? How did he do that? How can I be like that? That's the way to use people like the Dalai Lama. He's the example. So we can see, it's evident to anybody, you know, he's happy, he's content, he laughs, he cracks jokes, he's happy, he's not stressed, he hasn't got post-PTSD, he's not suffering from trauma. I mean, if you look at his life and look at the suffering, he should have more traumas than most people. He should have more PTSD. He should have more all these dramas that we talk about, not being rude because we have them. But we have to ask the question, why? And don't put him on a pedestal. Oh, that's just the Dalai Lama. That's insulting him. It's because he's done the work. It means he's done the wisdom wing, which means he's stopped his own suffering and its causes. He's achieved his own liberation from suffering and its causes, as Buddha's words put it. That's the meaning of nirvana. He's done the job. So, and that's hard for us to hear. We hear it if we're good Buddhists, but we can't kind of hear it. What do you mean he's given up suffering and its causes? Yeah. Well, he's given up delusions. He's given up anger, attachment. He's realized emptiness, and he's now added to that compassion. So he's a happy fellow, basically. He tries to act like an ordinary person. He tries to act like us and says he gets angry. No one believes him, you know. He tries to sort of, like he says he gets angry, this and that. But he can see that he's stable, together, easygoing. We've got to ask why. We can't even handle the suffering of our own dog. So what is it that causes us to suffer when we see suffering? This is the point. And it's surprising to us. We assume when we see our doggies suffering, not to mention the Ukrainians, not to mention the world, that's why we suffer. That's why we stress out. It isn't. Why we suffer is because we have attachment. So what? And we suffer because when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is your dog suffering, your attachment, you see, this is why back to junior school and high school, to the lowest and middle scope of the Lam Rim, if we don't understand Buddha's analysis of attachment, we don't understand how to get proper attachment. This is a fact. So attachment is this cute word, you know, but we have to understand it in a bit more depth. So basically, it's just, as far as the Buddha is concerned in the Four Noble Truths, it is in the second noble truth, the causes of suffering, karma and delusions, effectively the main delusion, the main neurosis, the main affliction, the main suffering state of mind, the main unhappy state of mind, the main, all these words, you know, is called attachment. We don't understand Buddha's analysis of it, then we can't really say we understand Buddha, and it just takes time. Effectively, it's the main cause of our suffering, which is utterly surprising. So what is it? Well, it's the main voice of the root delusion, which is this fantasy I that we've all made up. So the delusion is called ego grasping. It's this primordial assumption and clinging to a concrete, solid, intrinsic, separate me. So subtle, so primordial, we don't identify it, you know. On the basis of that, then this emotional hunger called attachment is its main voice. So it's just there as a default mode. It's there as an assumption. And the basic assumption of attachment is that we must only get the nice things. Attachment can't cope with problems. Attachment can't stand bad things. It's a junkie that only wants nice things. We can see this. So the millisecond attachment is thwarted, the millisecond attachment doesn't get only the nice thing, which is and what that means, and it sounds brutal, attachment only wanting the nice things means attachment only wants what I want. It's necessarily self-centered. So the minute it doesn't get what I want, the wrong taste coffee, the red light, the husband slurping his tea, forget the bad, they're really heavy things. Start with the small. What arises when attachment doesn't get what he wanted, which is 1,000 times a day? That's called aversion. That's the bare bone state of mind. So this ego grasping, attachment, and aversion, they're the three poisons Buddha talks about, the three toxic emotions. And they are the source of all the others, jealousy and all the other dramas. They all they come from, are rooted in these three. It's a very specific analysis of the Buddhas. It's not how we talk in modern psychology, with certainty. So aversion is what arises when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So it can be very mild aversion, like you get annoyed. That's called aversion. A strong level of aversion is called anger. A milder level is frustration, irritation, upset, annoyed. We all have that. Now, you don't go to your therapist and say, oh, I got annoyed today. She'll tell you to shut up and go home and come back when you want to kill your husband. Do you get my point? We only deal with dramas in our therapy. We wait till serious things happen. We wait till our wheels fall off before we go to the car mechanic. That's just plain ridiculous. And so the Buddha's techniques is to learn to see our mind well before the wheels fall off, well before you want to kill your husband. That's why we have to learn to have concentration meditation, so we can start to pay attention to what is going on in this mind of ours and see it, identify it, grab it, change it before it comes to the surface as emotion. This is the real skill that Buddha gives us, you know. So, okay, there's attachment and aversion 1,000 times a day. We run between like drunken sailors, all happy and excited because attachment gets what he wants, upset, annoyed, irritated when it doesn't. Go back again. You know, all the time. It's just they're working quite subtly, these two states of mind. So naturally, because attachment only wants the nice things, as soon as you see your doggy suffer, attachment's not happy. It doesn't want problems. It can't cope. It has a panic attack. An aversion arises and you freak out. Now, added to that, that's in the deluded side. Added to that, you have got compassion. You see the suffering of your dog. You reach out. You want to help your dog. But what you don't notice is the fact that panic and fear are not coming from compassion. This is the point in Buddha's analysis of the mind. It's so shocking, but it's so clear. We've got deluded, neurotic, afflicted, unhappy states of mind, one category. And we have another category called the virtues or the positive qualities, love, compassion, kindness, generosity. Now, the point is, from the Buddhist perspective, the first lot are the cause of any suffering we have. First of all, just right in our own mind. Second, the virtues, they can't cause suffering. You cannot suffer because of compassion. That's a shock to us. You can't suffer because of compassion. Compassion is a virtue. So the part that causes suffering is the attachment that pollutes the compassion, that keeps it limited. That's why we suffer. So as you progress working on this path and you get to the bodhisattva path, by that point, even yet if you haven't realized emptiness, you've subdued your attachment and anger to an incredible degree. And so you've grown and grown your love and compassion. So this is why it's not a joke to call it courageous compassion, because now nothing disturbs you. It's all grist for your mill. You give a bodhisattva problems, they're in heaven. They don't want to live in the boring old mountains and the trees with the peace and quiet. They want to come down to the maniac places, you know. I mean, Santa Fe is not so maniac. New York's maniac. You can't tell whether people are talking to themselves or on their phones on the street. Everyone is as mad as snakes, as we say in Australia, you know. It's shocking. It's unbelievable. I prefer it to Santa Fe. I never had problems. The loudest noise I ever had in my house on 125 East Palace Avenue, my office, where I sort of stayed on my couch. The biggest noise I had was on Saturday nights, and these cars would come with their big booming music, and it would seep through my 15-foot thick walls, you know. That was about the biggest noise I ever heard. Anyway, bodhisattvas love problems because now they have got compassion. And even if they haven't realized emptiness yet, some may be attached, but not much. So it doesn't disturb them. This is a thing we have to understand. We don't suffer because of attachment. We don't even suffer because of suffering there. We suffer because attachment can't stand problems, and aversion is the response that wants to push it away. So what happens? You get angry, and you want to punch and kick and scream at the people who cause the suffering, or you get depressed and kill yourself. The number of people, when you'd hear about COVID, you know, and all those work at the health, like I said last night, the health, number of them who killed themselves because they couldn't handle the pain. The pain was real. The suffering was real. They couldn't cope. But it's not because of compassion. It's not being rude. It's because we have attachment and aversion. This is an utter surprise to us. We don't think like this in our modern psychology. But this is a revelation when we understand it. So we have to deal with what we can handle. We can't take more burdens than we can bear. And if you can't stand to see suffering every day on the streets of New York City, you don't live there. You come to Santa Fe instead. I'm not being sarcastic. You have to know what you can handle. You have to know what you can bear, you know. So, but this is where the wisdom one comes in. So powerful. Part of our suffering is we have compassion. We see the suffering, even of your dog. But why we panic, you think about this, is because we don't have the wisdom to know how to help. And I'm even just talking about medical help, not mental. So that's why you panic. You know, if you travel with your friend who's a nurse, let's say, she's a qualified nurse, and you both decide, you know, to go to the war zones, and you apply for the Doctors Without Frontiers, you know, without borders, isn't it? And you walk into the tent, and there are all the dying people, and people with their legs off and screaming in pain and the blood everywhere. Well, listen to this. The nurse, she has compassion, she sees it. You, who don't have any skills, can't even put a Band-Aid on, have compassion. But look at the difference. Because she has wisdom, ordinary wisdom to know how to help people, she doesn't freak out. She has her wisdom, she has compassion, and because her compassion is mixed with that wisdom, she goes straight to the beds and she knows what to do to help. But you stand there hopeless. I don't know what to do. And you go crazy. That's why we go crazy, because we don't know how to help. So, of course, the deeper wisdom we're talking here is the wisdom of the bodhisattvas, who have clairvoyance and can see the cause of this suffering and know how to help, but also know they can't make the suffering go away. You can't make it go away overnight. Our attachment wants to make it all go away and make everything lovely again. But you can't. So when you have this is why the view of karma in Buddhism is so powerful. As part of your own practice, it equips you with the wisdom, the Buddha's view of why there is suffering in Ukraine, why there is COVID, why that dog is suffering. You don't. Part of the way we freak out and suffer is, why is this happening? We don't have an answer. Now, if you have faith in God, you will say it's God's will. That's good, nothing wrong. It's just not Buddha's view, that's all. Buddha's view is karma. So if you have the view of karma for yourself first, like we talked last night, with the Four Noble Truths, then you know why you are suffering, and it becomes your practice to own responsibility and then work with the suffering and change your karma and stop harming others and practice ethics and purify and live in vows. That's your basic practice. Then you get to know your mind and you understand the delusions and you work on those. This is all the first and second scopes. This is the teachings we share with the Hinayana path. That's the wisdom wing. That's what energizes us to become renounced from suffering and its causes, to become brave and wise. And now we can get into the compassion wing, and we're qualified to keep moving. And now we know why others are suffering due to karma and delusions. And that's the basis of compassion. So we can't just walk off and have compassion. It's just not enough. It doesn't work. And because we have not worked on our attachment and our aversion and our delusions, that's what blinds us from seeing clearly. And as Amazopa puts it, compassion is not enough. Meaning well is not enough. So look at our lives. There's your brother, an alcoholic. You love your brother. You remember this little boy, he was so cute and sweet and you played together. Now he's this older man and he's now suffering terribly with an alcoholic, let's say. Now, one, you do have compassion. Compassion is, oh my God, look at the suffering. Even you have great compassion. What can I do to help? Then you have love for him. Love is may he be happy. But what you don't see is you've still got attachment, and your attachment, the attachment part of you, see your ugly old brother and his damned alcoholism. He's upsetting your life. How dare he make my life a drag? Attachment's totally self-centered. It can't cope with the alcoholism. It can't handle your brother being this way. Attachment's like this freaked out part of us. And then it gets angry. When you get angry when you see it. So that pollutes your compassion. It drags down your compassion. And what that attachment does, because attachment is a busybody, it'll stick its nose where it doesn't belong. So you'll barge in and looking like you're being so compassionate and try to help your brother. But it's you're not got the wisdom to see that your brother is not interested in your advice. He is not ready for AA, but you barge in, you force him to go, and then you get mad at him because he falls off the wagon again, because you don't realize your compassion is there, but it's polluted by your attachment, and that's what makes the mess. We've got to see the difference in our mind. This is Buddha's skill. This is Buddha's unique, marvelous approach to the mind. You've got the neurotic, I-based, fear-based, delusional, afflicted, disturbing emotions. He calls them those. And we have to distinguish them from the love and compassion and wisdom and kindness. They are there in us, there's no doubt, but they're limited by the other stuff. So the wisdom wing work is the working on this other stuff. Controlling our body and speech by abiding by the laws of karma, living in our vows, doing lots of purification, doing our nundros, all of this, purifying our minds, calming our minds down by working on our body and speech and abiding by the laws of karma. And that is what enables us then to lessen the delusions. And naturally, as the delusions lessen, the virtues grow. It's logical. It's a process. So this is what makes a mess in our lives. We mean well, but we make a mess because we haven't got the wisdom, because we barge in. And attachment is just a busybody. It sticks its nose where it doesn't belong. Always giving advice, acting like it's so kind. And our trouble is we can't distinguish between attachment and love, attachment and compassion. They seem the same to us because we don't use this model. It's so powerful when we see it. So the wisdom we're talking about is not just the wisdom when you realize emptiness that sees reality. It's the wisdom that comes from just common sense. Because the more attachment we've got, the more anger, the more jealousy, the more resentment, the less wisdom we have. We can't see past our own noses. We only see what I want, but we act like it's compassion. We kind of cheat ourselves and we mislead others, And that's why we get exhausted and depressed when we try to be compassionate and we try to help others, and then it makes a mess. Or the other type of one is when we have this attachment, especially the attachment to being a good girl, attachment to being approved of. This attachment is, when we really begin to understand attachment, this is the most primordial. It drives every sentient being in the universe. It's the closest to emptiness, the closest to the main delusion. It's this attachment to be seen and heard and have a good reputation. It's so subtle. And that often is what drives us to rush around being mummy's little helper, doing good things, helping others. And then we wonder why we get treated like a doormat. We wonder why people take advantage of us. It's not because you're being compassionate. It's because your compassion is polluted by this neediness to be seen as a good girl. Always saying yes, never saying no, thinking you're so noble, then it breaks your back. This attachment is the deepest one, more than the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I tell you. This really makes a mess. So wisdom is just, in a sense, common sense. But it cannot get it until you start working on your own mind. It doesn't come. You can read books till the cows come home. You can pass your Geshe exam. You can be a smarty pants philosopher. You can even talk about emptiness beautifully. But if you haven't done the inner work, you haven't started to unpack and unravel your own mind and take responsibility and own your attachment, own your anger, own your jealousy, recognize it, nothing will change. Nothing will change. Being your own therapist, as Lama puts it. This is the absolute fundamental starting point. This happens all the way to Buddhahood. And when you're ready, so the degree that you've done any work at all in the first and second scopes is the degree you have any valid compassion at all. You can't separate wisdom from compassion. You can't. They're separate practices. The compassion is profoundly limited. We will never have the bodhisattva's compassion until we've done the inner work of the wisdom, which is, if you like, what we would call self-compassion. Because what causes me suffering is not compassion, is not other people's suffering, it's my attachment to only have nice things, and my anger and aversion and panic and despair when I see the bad things. To see that, and know how to handle our lives. We'll know what we can cope with. We'll carry the weights that we can bear, not more. Take it one step at a time. Are we communicating? So if there are any questions more about that, then we'll go into the techniques of how to get this compassion. It's just like background, Anybody on Zoom? Anybody on Zoom? Anybody there, Mary?
No, Venerable, not yet.
Sweetheart, talk. Yes, please. Mic is helpful.
Someone I know very recently.
Bring it closer to the mic. Huh?
Should I talk? I have a loud voice.
But I need to hear it too.
Can you hear me?
Deaf.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So someone I know recently lost one of their parents, and I wrote what I thought in the course of my life was a compassionate letter to them to try to make them feel better. And I wonder now, after listening to you, how do I distinguish between that being genuine compassion or a desire to be sort of recognized?
I know. Okay. Until we're really quite advanced on the bodhisattva path, it's just natural that everything we do that's compassionate will be polluted by some degree or other of attachment. We shouldn't put ourselves down for it, but this is where, beginning to see your own mind, you start to be aware of the levels of attachment, and then you have more skill in knowing how to express what you're seeing, and you're seeing the need to be seen as a good girl. This is really, really subtle, Karen. Until we're quite advanced, we can't begin to see this level of attachment. So absolutely there all the time. Since we're born, we've been trying to be good girls and be approved of, because that's the definition of being successful. If somebody else smiles at us, we must be okay. So some of us have more than others have this, and some suffer more than others, but it's kind of primordial. So it's always going to be there, but the more you practice, the more you're aware of it, and then the more sincere you can become. That's it. Do you understand? Anybody else? Yes.
Is this good?
I really wish, if you don't mind, just while you say the question, you could take the mask off. If you don't mind. If you don't want to, it's okay. It's really hard to hear.
Thanks for reminding me.
Thank you, Don.
Is this okay with the
Very
sound?
good, yes.
I think I had an aha moment.
Good.
In terms of attachment, it's like we're always wanting to help and improve and whatever. It seems, for me, the attachment comes in the outcome. We're attached to the outcome.
Attachment what?
The issue with attachment is that I'm attached to the outcome.
Attachment always wants it to be the way I think it should be. Yes. We're trying to, so, when we say control freak, that's attachment. One aspect of attachment is hunger for something more. Attachment is going after something. Attachment is always, it's got many aspects. This one is always wanting what I want. The outcome, you could say that, but go on.
And so my aha moment is, it has to do kind of with karma, is that, and kind of the difference between the feminine and the masculine.
I don't know about that part. Keep it simple.
Okay, but process, like women are more happy with process and doing, they're not so attached to how it's going to finish.
Attached.
Pardon?
Who are you saying is not so attached to outcome?
It's more of a feminine.
Is it? I don't know.
Female.
Well, anyways, I'm a girl, but I don't think I think I've got, whatever. Go on.
This is
what's the question?
This is my question. I don't want to ask a question. I just want to get your.
I want to hear it all about. Is it?
It's not a question.
No, it's just you're telling us your opinions.
It's just like I had to realize. I just sort of had a realization that it's not about the attachments, the attachment to the outcome of my efforts. So
Okay,
anyway.
good. That's a good insight. That's good. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, sweetheart.
Okay.
Anybody else got something to say or a question? Thank you, darling. Okay, so why don't we now go to the actual components of the techniques, the components, the techniques themselves of how to cultivate these levels of compassion. You know? Okay, so there's two main techniques over the centuries that Tibetans in all the traditions have practiced. One is that culminate in bodhicitta. So first of all, what's bodhicitta? Bodhicitta, I don't know, most of the words we can say in English, but this word somehow, you say it in English, it means technically awakening thought. Well, you can say that, but somehow, I don't know, bodhicitta doesn't say much either, but we can learn to get the meaning of it. So what it refers to, it's not equivalent to compassion. It's the culmination of compassion. It's the end result of cultivating love and compassion, great compassion, and eventually doing this primordial shift in the mind, where now others, all others, automatically are more important than I. So as soon as we say that, it's too shocking. Because we haven't done the self-compassion, we haven't done the work of the wisdom wing, this is too shocking for our minds. We have no way of getting our head around it. That's why you can't even begin to understand that in the wisdom wing. This is just too ridiculous. But this is the literal meaning of bodhicitta. When you've got bodhicitta, there are two main qualities. First of all, when you've got it, it's not just a moment of it. It's not like some experience that comes and goes. It's a genuine, stable realization. In other words, it's when you can play that piece of piano every time effortlessly. That's what a realization is. When it's effortless, you know. So bodhicitta, when it's effortless, it's got two parts. The first part is this spontaneous attitude to whoever's in front of you. They're your job. It's like you're a mother for every person on the universe, every person on the planet. As soon as whoever sentient being is there, what worm, what rat, the dog, the insect, the flea trying to take your blood, the pedophile in front of you, the gunman, the dog, the lion, whoever, automatically there's this feeling of responsibility. It's my job to help them. And it comes, this is massive. The other one, the long-term part of bodhicitta, is this fierce, courageous attitude that you're going to never give up going one step at a time, practicing life after life after life on this process, this very conscious process of becoming a Buddha, of increasing your wisdom and increasing your compassion life after life. In other words, practicing the six perfections until eventually it's culminated in your Buddhahood. That's bodhicitta, the best you can hear from that. And so it's not an equivalent of compassion. It's the result of having perfected this compassion and love and all these other qualities. So there's two main techniques in the Tibetan tradition. One is called the six causes and one a result. And the other is called something, I think it's called exchanging self for others, something like that. So there's a technique that Pabonka uses in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, the Lam Rim books that Lama Zopa really likes us to study. That's a combination of these, and it's 11 little points. So these are basically like little bullet points, the practices, the 11 of them, and which people would spend years in retreat accomplishing one step at a time. That's the combination of these two together. So we'll go through some of these points, and then we'll go and revert to this particular text called the 8 Verses of Mind Training, or Lojong, which is another term for this more advanced level of exchanging self for others. This whole area of the practice of the bodhisattva that really is outrageous, really is courageous, and really is shocking when you hear the words, you know. In other words, advanced levels. But we can all practice, we can do our best. So the starting point in these 11, and this is already powerful. We can spend the rest of the weekend just on this. It's the practice of equanimity. So it's got different uses. This word has different uses in Buddhism. In the wisdom wing, the first and second scopes of the Lam Rim, the teachings that is that noise is me. That's not my voice or something. Look at that. My voice. Anyway, it's those are what was I saying? I forget. I distracted myself. So, okay, equanimity. Yeah, okay, equanimity in there at that level, as you practice controlling your body and speech by abiding by the laws of karma and living in vows, and then controlling your mind by working on your delusions, becoming your own therapist. But one of the consequences of this is, instead of being up and down like a yo-yo every day, it's, you know, bipolar, not a joke, all excited minute in one day and despairing the next because we've got no control over our body, speech, and mind. We're just pulled from pillar to post, life after life. But when we start to practice and start to harness our mental and verbal and physical energy, we become more equal. We become more steady. That equanimity is marvelous. You're not berserk now. You're not up and down like a yo-yo. You're more equal in the way you behave. And this is already fantastic for you. But this equanimity here is quite different. It's on the Mahayana path. And this particular one is an attitude, and I'll just give you my words for the definition. When you've accomplished it, what it is this heartfelt recognition that friend, enemy, and stranger, we'll go into this, are equal from one point of view. They equally want happiness and don't want suffering. That's it. That's the meaning of equanimity. So to get that already is incredible. But to get that is the foundation, the basis upon which you will then grow love, compassion, great compassion, exchange self for others, bodhichitta. Without this equanimity, you can't go further. It's the basis of the building that culminates in bodhichitta. And it's hugely important to understand what it is. So part of our problem here with all these words and these techniques in the compassion wing, part of our problem is when we think of meditation for a start, we think of trying to have an experience. So we think of a meditation on compassion, we think we have to have an experience of compassion, have tears in the eyes. That's not the meaning of these techniques. These techniques are training. You are training. You're like at the gym. You train and you train and you train, and eventually it leads to the realization of a certain ability, So it's hard work. And the methodology in these techniques is intellectual, it's conceptual. You're using logic to argue with the ego's absurd illogic, to try and counteract, or to break down, to counteract delusions, absurd self-centered misconceptions that prevent us from having love, compassion, great compassion, bodhicitta. And you're trying to, employ your wisdom and your clarity and your goodness to argue with these nonsense in order to eventually replace them. So it's really internally intense, hard work to do these meditations. It includes visualization, but it's based upon really clear thinking to argue with ego's misconceptions so that we're breaking down gradually the artificial barriers that delusions have constructed between self and other. Okay, so let's look at how you do equanimity. There's a multitude of ways. And here, even as we're talking, we can imagine, we visualize. We visualize right in front of us, to the left in front of us, a beloved. In the definition here of a friend is a person you have attachment for. You're attached to, your poodle, whoever it is you're attached to, a person you're close to, one of your beloveds, for whom you also happen to have love and compassion. There's no argument, you do have that. But the definition of friend here is the object of attachment. Then in the next one, you visualize right in front of you, eyeball to eyeball, a so-called enemy. We mightn't use that word in our daily life, but that's the word referring to the object of our aversion, who basically is a person who has stopped doing or doesn't do what my precious attachment wants. And the third category is called a stranger. And who are they? 99.99% of the universe. And who are they? They are the people or the beings who have neither harmed nor helped me. So what do I feel for the attachment people? I adore them. They look divine. I feel close. I'm not criticizing. This is the world. I do have love for them. I want them to be happy. I do have compassion. I want them not to suffer. How do I feel about the enemy? Well, by definition, I do not want them to be happy, and I might even actively want them to suffer if I really hate them. And I have no interest in them stopping suffering because they're distant from me. And the third category, and this is what's really rather cruel, we couldn't care less. Or as Americans say, you could care less. I never quite work out why one or the other. It's very odd, isn't it? I could care less. Oh, no, it makes sense. I just heard it for the first time. We say you couldn't care less. Isn't that interesting? So that's what's shocking. And of course, we think this is normal behavior. No one questions, and it feels rather exhausting that we should question this. You mean it's wrong to not care about 99.9% of the universe? Well, it's not a wrong or right. It's just how we are. So by definition, a friend is, and this is the part that's really, we should be embarrassed, it's so self-centered. A person who's an object of attachment, unless, of course, they don't love us in return, then it's painful. But usually they do what my attachment wants. They satisfy my needs. It seems cruel when we think of it this way, but it's so obvious when we analyze it. By definition, a friend in my life, of course, we might fight with them sometimes. That's always often happens. But generally speaking, an object of attachment, my beloved, my friend, whether it's your poodle or your husband, they often do what your attachment wants. And this is the part that's difficult. That is the basis of why we want them to be happy. Of course, you can see with parents, when your child is mean, they reject you, you still want them to be happy, but that's unusual. If your girlfriend who comes, your friend at work or your whatever, or your husband, if they keep doing what your attachment doesn't want, eventually you're going to hate them. You'll give them up, So by definition, in this framework, friend is a person who fulfills my needs, in other words. And then as soon as they stop, they transfer over into the enemy category, isn't it? And if they do neither, which is not in the universe, they're in the third category and we can't even see them. So this is exhausting, because what we're trying to do here is completely cut down these artificial barriers, these three, that construct those three labels. This is intense, heavy-duty stuff. Don't take it lightly. It's just that it almost seems too shocking that it's still living real teachings, methodology to actually become a bodhisattva. It's insane, actually. It's too outrageous. It's like learning to be a saint. When I was a Catholic, I loved the saints. I don't know, I had a course on how to become like a saint. Because a saint was a person somehow who just was unusual, who got born that way, and the best you could do was revere them. But to do a course where you'd become a saint, that would almost be considered arrogance, But that's all this is. Buddha says we can all become a Buddha. We could therefore all become a bodhisattva, because it's on the way to becoming a Buddha. And this is the technique still coming from a living tradition, living in the minds of these holy beings. Of course, the tradition we're using is the Tibetans, That's why when they first came out of Tibet in 1959, they were desperate to find land where they could build their monasteries, where the older holy beings could transfer the knowledge from their minds into the minds of the younger ones. That's why they were so desperate to do that, to keep these lineages alive. And I know when I first heard the teachings about bodhicitta from Lama Zopa, our very first teaching, I couldn't believe. I thought, these people are ridiculous. How can they talk like this? It's like absurd. How can you aim for that? It felt like too high. I couldn't see a way into it, But I remember, and this Holiness often talks this way, and it's really important to think this. It's kind of humble. I remember he said, and this is when it started to make sense to me. He said, if you want to make others happy, you please practice compassion. If you want to make yourself happy, please practice compassion. So suddenly you realize, and this is something I find we find it very hard in our culture, because we think that sounds selfish. But the teachings, the very first level of teachings, the teachings about karma, the key point, we discussed this yesterday, about karma, is when you start to realize that your delusions, your anger, your resentment, your lying, your killing, your harming harms you. And what renunciation means is self-compassion. So if you don't have that, you miss the point of the teaching, We just think, oh, that sounds selfish. So we have guilt instead, which is neurotic. You've got to be kind to yourself in recognizing your garbage, because that's what's breaking your heart. Now, when it comes to compassion, it's realized as a benefit to you. You are a beneficiary of practicing compassion. And this is where, when you're feeling depressed and lonely, one of the most powerful practices for your own sake, not out of just 8 worthy dharmas, not out of just to be approved of, but it's a really genuine practice to realize it benefits you. As soon as you reach out to one dog, you feel better. Don't discount that. That helped my mind hugely. If you want to help others, practice compassion. You want to help yourself, practice compassion. It's not just some holy thing in the sky, because it's what it is logically. It opens you up to connect with others. What cuts the feeling of separateness. very powerful, very logical. And eventually, of course, the compassion you achieve will be beyond I. But you've got to go one step at a time. So equanimity, then, okay, what are some of the logical arguments we need to use to argue with ego's absurd nonsense? There's so many ways you can think of it, and so many ways you can so-called meditate on it, to contemplate it, to argue with the misconception. So, but that means you've got to understand attachment, friend, understand aversion, enemy, and understand stranger. Because they're these constructs that ego has literally made up. There's no, and this is one of the arguments, there's no objective basis in those three people. In other words, the enemy isn't stamped with their forehead, like it's their permanent nature. The friend is not stamped with friend, and that's their permanent nature. Because we know one of the arguments, for example, is that my beloved is the worst enemy of their ex-boyfriend. So straight away, it's clear that the friend is not intrinsic. This is like applying emptiness. It's an argument to loosen the grip of these delusions. That's one argument you can do in the meditation. And that's another way of putting how they're unstable. You know, these labels are unstable. I always use the example of, what's your name? Rob again. Rob. Okay, let's say Rob is, I don't know Rob. He's a stranger. And let's say Dawn is a mate with Rob. And Dawn tells me one day, well, that poor Rob, he lives down the road, number 6. I always use his example. And he gets terrible migraines. And I don't know Rob from a bar of soap, whatever they say. I don't know what some of the sayings. I don't know Rob, but I try to be compassionate. Oh, the poor fellow, does he really? Pass the sugar, please, Dawn. That's about the end of it. And why is not my heart not broken-hearted with compassion? Because he's a stranger. I can't even visualize him. I vaguely know the bloke from the bus, he lives at number 7 or 6. Now, what happens when I meet Rob and we fall in love and he moves me into number 6? Suddenly he's gone overnight from stranger to friend. Now, look at the difference in my behavior towards him. Oh, Robina's so compassionate. She takes care of Rob. She spends all this money on the doctors. She's so kind to Rob. She takes care of him day and night. Well, excuse me, the point about equanimity is this. Ask Rob, when I labeled him stranger, tell us about your migraines, Rob. He will tell you they're unbearable. Now you ask him when he's labeled my friend, how are your migraines, Rob? He will give you the exact same answer. So 1 second he's labeled stranger and I couldn't care less because he doesn't affect my life. Next second, I'm all over him like a rash, as we say in Australia, because now I'm attached to the man, looking like I'm so compassionate. But what's changed? My attachment's getting what it wants. That's all. But his suffering is identical to when he was a stranger or a friend. And indeed, when he gives me up for a younger version, chucks me out and moves in Dawn, now he's in the enemy, and I hope he suffers with his migraines. But the real point is, I've got 3 different views. I see 3 different people. And according to those views, I care or don't care. So it's clearly self-centered. But from his point of view, this is the entire point. There's not a fraction of difference. This is a simple point. So all the strangers on the planet, for me, my strangers feel just like my beloveds. And my enemies feel just like the strangers. It's sort of obvious. We really do know it intellectually. But because we're driven by attachment, it's hard to hear it. And it feels exhausting. You mean I'm supposed to love them all? Give me a break. We know how hard it is to love one person, even your poodle, because they often do what you don't want. So when we get to understand how attachment is the problem, you don't beat yourself up. You just acknowledge it and recognize it. This is Buddha's analysis, You should take it according to our own pace. Can't force. But we understand the logic of it. Meaning, when you're full of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, the attachment, aversion, and indifference in this case, the world, we've got these 3 groups of people. But there's no objective basis whatsoever. And this doesn't mean that when he's an enemy, he didn't harm me. He did harm me. And it doesn't mean when he was my friend, he did benefit me. He did. That's not argued with. But attachment takes that as its basis for labeling. And if he does all the things I want, I call him lovely and I'm prepared to like him. If he does things I don't want, I don't care and I chuck him out. So it's our labeling that's so self-centered. And our behavior is on the basis of that. And use another argument is your own self being that one person. So now you visualize in front of you, to the left, your beloved, in front of you, your enemy, and to the right, a stranger. And now see that they, as the friend sees you as divine. You look in their eyes, you can see they're dazzled looking at you. And all they're doing is seeing a beautiful person because their attachment's running the show. So you're a friend for that person. Now you get to look at the enemy, and they look at you with daggers. They see an ugly person, and they look at you. And now the stranger can't even look at you. You're too boring. But you know in yourself, there's not a fraction of difference. It's obvious. These are the arguments to use to argue with ego's misconceptions, which we are so spontaneously kind of caught up in, you know. So what do we do with this? Well, we try to catch it. How do you apply it in daily life? Well, you know, like in a shop and there's a line. We call it a queue in Australia. So if you know, if someone barges in and you don't like them, excuse me, the line's behind. But if your friend comes in, hop in front of me, it's all right. Like you're so kind. No. I mean, then you practice it. You let the mean, ugly person come in. Please come in, you know. I mean, that's a powerful practice of equanimity. Because you realize they want to be happy just like you. It's sort of obvious, but how you don't have it in your head, but apply it. Simple ways like that. Or let's say you're a grandmother and you see your little precious grandchild, whom you think is a saint, adorable, or your little doggy woggy, whom you think is divine, playing with the next door a smelly dog, you know. So straight away your attachment's working overtime, and you're watching like a Hawkins ugly dog is going to upset your pretty dog. Well, realize they're both the same. They both want to be happy. One looks ugly to you, one looks divine. That's just your view. Okay, you maybe watch because the other dog might be mean. But they both want to be, there's no difference from their point of view. That's the point here in equanimity. You're getting yourself out of the equation. You're getting yourself out of the equation. You're trying to see these three people as separate. You're trying to see how, from the perspective of wishing to be happy, which is so spontaneous, and wishing not to suffer, there is no difference. But then we get confused, and you think, let's say, you hear about some evil politician. And then when we say, well, you know, he wants to be happy, what we think that means is you're kind of patting him on the head and going, oh, well, the poor thing, let him get on with it. That doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that. Please stop him from doing his harm if you can. It just means you're getting past your own labels, your own self-centered labels, and then painting those people with that one brush of adorable, ugly, indifferent. Then the things that are not stable. So sure, you might have that dog of yours might be a saintly dog, and the next door neighbor's dog might be an ugly looking thing who will harm your dog. Be aware of it, protect your dog, but observe the attachment and the aversion and how, you know, and how that's preventing you from seeing the reality. Simple things like that. It's using logic, actually, and surprises to us. It surprises us to think you're using logic to get at compassion. Because the virtues, you see, all the virtuous states of mind are logical. They're coherent. They're reasonable. They're not distorted. They're rooted in reality. They're rooted in at least the reality of dependent arising. But the delusions are not. They cause us to live in la-la land. We can't see reality. We can't see past our own nose. We're up and down like yo-yos. It's painful and emotional, and it prevents us from seeing things clearly, you know. This is the idea. What's the time? What's the schedule, Dendra? Noon. Is there a tea break? A morning tea break? Is there a morning tea? You got morning tea for people? Have a tea break, I think. Maybe you might have lunch at 12:30. Have a tea break, I think. Don't you think so? And what is there for? You're going to take care of people, Dawn. This is Dawn. She's taking care of people. Along with Christopher, I think. I think 10, 15, I think. Don't you think? We can be relaxed. No reason to rush. We've got plenty of time. I think 15 minutes. Go, Dawn, go. Take care of them. Be their mum. Zoomers, I can't offer you a cup of tea. I'm so sorry. So go and get your own cup of tea, and I'll see you in all in 15 minutes. Okay, Mary? Thanks, darlings. See you in 15 minutes. I'll just cancel that. In the first level of practice, it's not even about your mind. And this is something that's quite unusual for us in our culture. We think about meditation. Yeah, I want to meditate. I want to see my mind. And that is the point. But, you know, if you've got uncontrolled body and speech, this is the Buddhist approach. If you've got uncontrolled words, those expletives, if you've got uncontrolled body, you shove every piece of cake whenever you see it, you've got no control. You know, this is our problem. And so the very first level of practice is really quite humble, but it's already pretty powerful. Is to control the delusion. Is to control the servants of the mind, which is your mouth. So you might run around running your bike over many people when they dare not to stop, but it's the mouth that's our problem, most of us in our lives, isn't it? I mean, we're maybe not rapists and murderers, but our mouth. I mean, we could spend the rest of the day and tomorrow talking about this. We can see the trouble we cause with our mouths, you know, bad mouthing. We spend our lives, if it's not the people in front of us, shouting at them, that's one thing, or it's not, but the one that we love because we feel safe doing it is bad mouthing people who aren't there. And I mean, it's not trying to make us feel guilty. We love doing this. We love finding fault in everybody else on the planet. You know, the pot calling the kettle black. So this is where one of the most important levels of practice is this humility of seeing our own problems. So one of the really marvelous, and the first one at least is to control the speech. Okay, so maybe the people you nearly ran, or who nearly hit because they didn't let you through, they didn't hear you shout at them, that's fine, whatever. But this interesting point is, as one of the practices, forget about for the sake of others, but again, this point about for our own sake. We wonder why we don't have peace of mind. Maybe we sit quietly in our own house and don't have many visitors, but we're always agitated. So you can't blame other people. It's because we're angry and upset and annoyed, and we make comments on the weather and comments on the politicians and comments about the person next door, and you read a book and you get mad at the person. We're always doing that. And it's hard not to, but that's what distresses our minds, our own angry mind, and then we vomit out the words, you know. This is what distresses us. Forget about the harm we do to other people. Recognize that even learning to control our speech in one day is a marvelous practice. Of course, it takes time. But again, our problem in our culture, we're very addicted to sharing. We call it sharing. It sounds so noble, you know. And part of our problem is we only have two modes. We vomit everything out or we suppress. So we assume if we control our speech and don't vomit it out, it's a no point the Buddha gives us. We have to learn to be aware, to be conscious, to notice the thoughts before they get to the mouth. So then the very first level of practice, even if in one day, forget about controlling your mind, if you can make a decision at the beginning of the day, I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk, both for the sake of those you abuse and for your own sake. It's a very powerful practice. It's surprising to us. It just sounds like kind of doing what your grandma says, behave nicely. This is the first level of practice in Buddhism. Okay, there mightn't be a vow. Yeah, there is, you know, we've got these vows: don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. And the basis for these, for Buddha, why he exhorts us not to do those actions, is not because he wants us to do what he says because he's the boss, which is the Christian teaching. A sin by definition for Christians is because God said don't do it, not for the Buddha. It's a natural law. So what's called a negative action, you know, shouting at somebody, harms you. So the reason it is labeled a negative action because it harms another, but why Buddha exhorts us not to do it is because it harms us. When we get this level of practice, we really can be happy to practice it. We don't feel guilty. We see the benefit of it, because if you don't vomit out the thought, or at least the words, and you learn then to begin to work with the thoughts, you are the beneficiary. You'll have a more peaceful mind. That's an extra point. So thank you for that. Anybody else there, Mary? Anybody else in the chat? Okay. Okay. So, So equanimity. Yeah, this huge attitude, this recognition, basically a recognition. It's very precise. One of our problems is we tend to merge all these different words into one big glob: love, compassion, generosity, you know, equanimity, all kind of the same. No, they're quite specific. So equanimity is this foundation. So what's the logic of it? Why are we trying to recognize that an enemy, a friend, and a stranger, from their point of view, are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. Why are we trying to show this? Not for some noble reason. It's because right now, we're trying to develop love and compassion. So love is, may you be happy. Compassion is, may you not suffer. And we're trying to develop this for everybody. So right now, we do have love and compassion, but only for the first. Maybe occasionally for some stuff. So when we can prove to ourselves and have some more conviction that everybody's equal, then it's comes the foundation for the development of love and compassion to equal everybody. And this is the point. Right now, I do want you to be happy, but the reason is because you make me happy. What we're trying to do is shift that to I want you to be happy because you want to be happy. We know that's real love. When your mother can say, whatever makes you happy, sweetheart, that's when she really loves you. Whereas if she normally, with typical attachment, she wants you to do what she wants. We know that's the nightmare with our parents sometimes because her attachment's so enormous. She gets upset when we do something that she doesn't like. We know that. So when someone can be happy for you, that's love. So just the wanting of others to be happy is the beginning of love. But we're not got there yet. We've just got this bare bones attitude of a recognition that people want happiness and don't want suffering. Maybe okay from the Buddhist perspective, they don't know how to get love and they don't know how to get happiness. They don't know how to stop suffering and they don't know how to get happiness. That's a different discussion. But it's this bare bones recognition. Everybody's the same in that sense. So this becomes the basis now for growing in through these 11 points. This love for every sentient being. May you be happy. Why? Because they want to be happy. And have compassion for them. Why? Because they don't want to suffer, which leads to great compassion. What can I do to make it happen? Which leads to bodhichitta. It's a logical internal process. So that we know in these techniques, there's this interesting kind of series of steps, they're kind of so quaint to us. So this next point, after equanimity in this 11 techniques is to then contemplate. This is hilarious for us. You need your calculator for this one. All sentient beings have been your mum. We think, what the hell is that all about? God Almighty, you're trying to make me suffer? Because we assume our mums are the cause of our suffering, isn't it? So it's too weird for us. So the logic of it is really just this, is getting our head around this outrageous Buddhist view, which is a basic point, fundamental, as we discussed last night, this Buddhist assertion that there are countless sentient beings, mind possessors. I love that word. The Tibetan word that we translate as sentient being is actually the word, literally, mind possessor. I think it's great, delicious, very direct. Well, for the Buddha, there are countless mind possessors. That's his analysis. That's his observation. And humans are a tiny percentage. So as we know very well in his analysis, especially you get it in the first scope and second scope, his view of these different realms of existence. As far as Buddha is concerned, there are countless sentient beings in samsara, quote unquote. So now samsara doesn't mean living in a place where you can have sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then nirvana is where you kind of got to go to boring old heaven where there's no sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not like that. Being in samsara is mental state of being caught up in the delusions, which cause you to have suffering rebirths. And being in nirvana is when you've cut those delusions. You cut the delusions. So now your mind is radiant, your mind is blissful, your mind is joyful, and your mind is virtuous. That's the meaning of nirvana, really. It's a state of mind, So for the Buddha, another way of describing being in samsara is in terms of the types of rebirth. So as you know, if we study the teachings a little bit, Buddha would assert a whole kind of spectrum of sentient beings in samsara. So the different levels, and the one that we're in is called the desire realm, and there are 6 divisions in that, 6 kind of 6 suburbs, really. And they're all in terms of levels of happiness to levels of suffering. So the top suburb is called the God realms, which is kind of what the Christians call heaven, the Muslims call paradise. So you can see, and this is what I always note, this point, I find this interesting, that over the centuries, human beings, you've got to respect us, kind human beings over the centuries in all the histories and all the realms, in all the countries you can imagine, everybody. There are some people who've gone off to try to think about the meaning of life. And some of them have delved inside internally And, you know, you've got this Australian Aboriginal view of the world. I tell you, it's so abstract, so bizarre, I wouldn't even understand it. It's called dream time. I just don't get it. You've got the, you know, the American Indians, all these different views. You've got the Indians, you've got here, you've got there. Everywhere you go, you've got human beings going back into history who looked into the meaning of life, who we can label, if you like, spiritual. And they've come, it seems to me they've come up with similar findings. Good on them. You don't have to believe a single one, so, you know, but at least respect them. So it seems to me it's interesting that the Christians would say heaven, okay? And they describe it in lyrical terms as a state of joy and bliss. Of course, if you're materialist, it just sounds like mental illness, you know, but he would just in the Christian view. Now, the Buddha has observed similar things, but got very different definitions of what it is and how you get there and how long it lasts. So you can say it like that. Similar things, very many similarities. But the Buddha would call these states of being God realms, and they're the fruit, because he has the fundamental view of karma, that everybody creates their own reality, step by step by step. Every millisecond, what we think and do and say, like we talked last night, this law of karma, is this process that we're all involved in naturally that produces the person we become. As His Holiness calls it, self-creation, which is absolutely radically different from the concept of a creator. There's no view like that in Buddhism. It's quite shockingly different, you know. There's no concept. Buddha says every single sentient being, those who are experiencing the greatest joy in the universe to the most intense suffering, each of us is experiencing the fruits of our past actions. It's not guilt, not basis for guilt or shame. It's not basis for anger. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's like, you know, diabetes is a result of eating too much sugar, for example. So you learn from it. I don't want that result, so I stop causing it. That's the basis of practice, starting point. So this state of being with God, this is the best suburb in samsara, in the desire realm. Desire, another word for attachment. We're living in a realm of existence that we have created over eons, driven by attachment. It's like internal evolution. Karma is like personal evolution in a sense. So you've got the gods, and these are the fruit of virtue, the fruit of goodness. So goodness, being kind and loving and compassionate and wise and taking care of people, this just naturally programs the mind in virtuous seeds, which will ripen naturally as states of incredible joy. And your physical body is like subtle light. This is the logic of karma. So that's the God realm, the best suburb. The Buddha would say it's not so cool because you're so blissed out. You don't realize you're still in samsara because you haven't realized emptiness. You haven't cut the root. The Christians would say it's the end result. The Muslims would say it's the end result. Buddha disagrees with that. Then you've got the humans. Now, our bodies are not made of light. That is clear. We've got these bags of bones, we've got these walking sewers that our mind is conjoined with. But the Buddha would say it's still the fruit of virtue. And it's a better rebirth to want to have, because at least you can access your intelligence and use your wisdom to try and get the hell out of samsara. So they're the so-called upper realms, the three best. There's a couple of the God realms and the humans. They're the three good suburbs. They're getting less in terms of bliss and joy. Humans not as good as the other ones, but it's a better quality one. It's got intelligence. Then you've got the lower realms, which are the fruit of virtue. And these are the suffering unit, the suffering suburbs. Animals is the next one. And we can see there's a lot more of them than humans. I mean, there's probably 7 billion mosquitoes in your garden one summer evening. They're sentient beings, they're mind possessors. And due to much negativity, they've got a mind that's very constricted, very limited. It's not meant to be negative. It's not meant to be a kind of judgment. We've all had these rebirths countless times, Buddha says. And it's intense suffering. The intense suffering. It doesn't mean they're not delicious beings. It doesn't mean it's not criticizing people. It's not punishment. No one's done it to them. And that takes time to see. Some can have incredible suffering at the hands of others. Then you've got the spirit realm, who are also disembodied beings, but this is a predominance of attachment, more of them. And then you've got the hell realms, which is a predominance of aversion and anger. So the Buddha's view is no one's created these places. No one sends anybody there. These are all the creation of our own minds. And this is the observation of the Buddha. You don't have to believe him. It's up to you to decide. You might like what he says, you might not like, you might look into it, you might agree with what he says. He's telling us what he has found to be so. So we're grown-ups, we can listen to it. So this is what he's saying. So why am I telling you about this? Because, the second point is all sentient beings have been your mum. So the idea is your mind being beginningless, because it can't be a first moment. That implies no law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect for the Buddha runs the universe, so by definition, you can't have a first cause. The Christians make a big fuss about that, and I'm not criticizing. I find all these very fascinating discussions. You know, the Catholics have a big philosophy, capital F, capital C. There can be a first cause, which is why they posit God. For the Buddha, it's just not viable. You can't posit something that existed that didn't have a cause, because everything is driven by the logic of cause and effect. That's the Buddha's view. So anyway, our minds are beginningless, he says, as nutty as that sounds to us. So given that our minds are all beginningless, and given that therefore we've all bumped into each other countless times, you can deduce they've all been our mum. They've all been your enemy too. They've all been your boyfriend as well. But the point here why mum is because, you know, as Dalai Lama says to us Westerners who hate our mums, well, think of your father. It doesn't matter who you think of. It's just a thought of someone who's said to have been kind to you, to use as an example, to get your mind to do what? To have this feeling of spaciousness and not be too stuck in this narrow view of enemy, friend, stranger for eternity. But we've had these countless lifetimes, and people have been countlessly done this and that. So they've all been my mum. So the next point is, coming from this idea of the mother, the conclusion, the mother is kind. And what we're trying to get from this is it's just a construct cultivated over the centuries by these yogis, a way of meditating and thinking as an example of a person who's been kind to us. So a mother. So I find it a very powerful technique, because most of us will say, but no, it's not true. My mother was terrible. She harmed me. She was an alcoholic. She stole. She was mean. She beat me. And of course, mothers can be this way. You know, of course, they're human beings. Join the universe. Why be surprised? We're always shocked. We always assume we all should have a perfect mother. I don't know why. You know, it's so weird. So the idea of the mother is the mother's kind. So even if your mum has been mean to you, I think it's a very powerful meditation to do, that to remember even a few things that your mother did. I think it's a really good example. And I can know many of my friends who hated their mothers have learned to, by changing the way they label their mother, by seeing their mother differently, you learn to have kindness towards her. I think it's a very good meditation. So, you know, I think, for example, let's say your mother gave you away. It's a common experience for many people. And so the commonest feeling of that is distress, being rejected. Some people suffer terribly. Some people don't. Some people suffer terribly and never get over it, you know, feel a terrible injury because of that. Well, let me say this. Many women like me have had an abortion. I'm not being judgmental, just saying the point. And I have a friend who, when in the 60s, like me, got pregnant. And I said, have an abortion, Judy. It's easy. It's nothing. She didn't want an abortion. It doesn't matter what her reasons were. And even she could have lost her boyfriend, but she decided she wouldn't. She consciously decided, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to have the baby and give her away. And she did. Now, that daughter never forgave her. So in other words, that daughter really hurt, offended. But I know this person, her motive was so pure. So if you think about it, you know, if you're given away, even if you've never had another good thing at the hand of your mother, you should never forget that incredible action. Why? If someone saves your life one day by dragging you from under a bus, you'll never forget their kindness. Well, that mother who gave you away at birth didn't kill you. And in this case, the person I'm talking made a conscious decision, you know. I remember one friend of mine, he told me that when he was about 40, his mum confessed that she was in the hospital, organized to have an abortion, in her gown, ready to go. She had to stand up. She put a handle on or turn the handle to go to the next step. She decided, no, I won't have an abortion. And here's was the result. He said it was mind-blowing to hear that. And somehow she didn't kill him, you know. It was very fascinating. So I think it's a very valid reason to think someone's been kind. If you think of your mother who's neurotic and self-centered and attached and possessive and neurotic, join the universe, nothing special. And what a powerful thing to do is, you see, when you understand back in the wisdom wing, the delusions, attachment, anger, exaggerate. That's their key function. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of your partner, the deliciousness of your doggy woggy, the deliciousness of whatever it is, the cake, doesn't matter. It exaggerates. It makes them look divine. We know that. Now, your mother, when I was a little girl, it's like I was in love with my mother, which is attachment. My mum was perfect as far as I could see. And then suddenly I remember from age 11, maybe now people are 4 when they give up their mother. I had to wait till I was 11. And I remember vividly the first time, it was a shock. The first time I found fault, it was like my mother fell off the pedestal. I could not believe that she wasn't perfect. And of course, it was downhill from there. Within a year, she's the worst person on the planet. Because now what has happened? Anger has taken over. And now all you see is the bad qualities. When we can get this is the Buddhist view, it's a revelation into our own minds and the world. The delusions exaggerate. They're not valid. They exaggerate. Love and compassion don't exaggerate. Attachment exaggerates the goodness and deliciousness of something. Aversion exaggerates the ugliness. And we go from pillar to post, these extreme views, you know. So then your mum, whom you hate, some people will never get over that. So I remember I started to think of the good qualities of my mother. Because you know yourself when somebody paints you with one brush and they never forgive you. You know how heartbreaking it is because you know they're not seeing the whole person. They're only seeing what their anger wants to see. You know that, and you know how painful it is. So that's what we do. So it's such a powerful example. Even if mum's dead, to start remembering some good things she did. Well, you know, she did give birth to you. You go, well, that's her job. No. She decided to give birth to you. That's pretty incredible. She wiped your dirty little bottom. She helped you tie your shoe nails. She got up in the middle of the night and fed you, even though she's neurotic. You can't say she didn't do those things. Even if you only think of 6 things, that's already what you're doing is painting a new picture of your mum. So slowly you're painting away some of the angry pictures and you're replacing it with a nice picture. Before you know it, you'll love your mum again. It's powerful practice and anybody can do it. You just have to want to. So it's a very powerful one. The mother is kind. So of course, they've all been your mum. They've all been kind at some point. So the conclusion from this is the 4th point. It's a conclusion. I must read kindness. There's a really powerful attitude that we're trying to get as a bodhisattva. If you can't see the kindness of others, you won't want to repay their kindness. You know, if one person's been kind to you, you want to repay their kindness. So here we're trying to think the whole world has been kind to me at one point or another. Then the conclusion, number 4 is that conclusion. I must repay this. It's incredible. But before you get to number 4, in number 3, there's a sort of like 3A and 3B. And this is a very powerful one. I love this one. The first one is the kindness of a mother. Now, the other one is more shocking in a way. All beings are kind. What does this mean? Well, first of all, also about the mother. When we say someone's kind, we tend to think that they're doing something, especially for me, that they've got me in their mind and they do it for me. So we see it as very personal, you know? Or we think of a person who's just got a kind aspect, a kind voice. And some people are like that, isn't it? But usually we say, oh, you are so kind. It's because the waitress in the cafe fed me an extra piece of cake and cream and gave me a discount. So I only think she's kind because she satisfied my attachment. So it's a self-centered view because she did what I wanted. So kind here doesn't mean that. Kind here means, this one about everybody's kind, is it's kind of like using dependent arising. That if you think about it, from the time of your conception in your mother's womb up to now, every tiny thing that you have benefited from in your life is the result of the handiwork of sentient beings. So my mother and my father provided sperm and egg. I would not have had a body but for that. That's a fact. Then my mother fed me for those months in that womb, you know. She probably thought about me and ate and the food she put into her mouth turned into my body. This is one of the most powerful ones. We always think my body. Excuse me, where's my body? This is a mountain of cows and fishes and potatoes and carrots. All those kind sentient beings that my mother ate that turned into this little body, the squirming being who came out shouting at 7 months. Bottom first, my poor mother. So already you're the handiwork of countless sentient beings. There's no possibility. This is emptiness independent arising. And it's got nothing to do with that bull that my mother ate, thinking about I must feed and turn into Robina's body. No, he didn't plan to do anything. It's the fact that this all happened. You You have your one, I think of always my blue socks. I always use my example. These aren't the right ones, though. These are the wrong ones. But I like my navy blue socks. I like them to be knee-high. And I will thank the shop when I go to buy them. But if you think about it and analyze it, it's true. It's a fact. I walk into the shop, let's say wherever it is, and get them, and you're going to see a series of little baby hangers with little socks on them, with a little packet, and it says the size. I'm not kidding here. Somebody size the socks. How can I know what size is right if there are a bunch of blue socks there mixed with the pink ones? They put them separate. Somebody, a human being did that. A human being did the typesetting. A human being created the font. A human being did the proofreading. These are facts. And all these bits and pieces together culminate in my socks and their packaging. This is not a joke. It's not kidding. It's literally logical. Every tiny sentient being involved in the thing and the hanger and the packaging and the people who made the paper, who did the typesetting, who did the proofreading, they could have been pedophiles. That's not the point here. All those beings were involved in me getting my blue socks. That's fact, scientific fact. So thinking of them, and whoever thinks of them, we don't. We think it's just their job, you know. It's real people. This is powerful. Your heart can't help but open up. Everyone and everything you've experienced has benefited your life up until now is the fruit of that. The food you eat in your fridge, the fridge that you've made, the mattress you sleep on, the carpet you walk on, the glasses you wear, everything is the handiwork of sentient beings. This is a scientific fact, and it's profound for us to open our hearts to think that. And then we're going to have this very strong conclusion of humility and gratitude to sentient beings, and then wishing to repay them, which is the steps we're making on this job of becoming a bodhisattva. You know? I mean, in general, we know ourselves when someone appreciates what you've done. It's so touching. It's so heartwarming. You know that. The kindness of sentient beings. Then we must repay their kindness. So this is the first series of the first part, and then it shifts into this other aspect called this exchanging self for others, which is this more dramatic, more radical way of accomplishing bodhicitta, if you like, and it's often called exchanging self for others, or it's often called mind training, lodrong, and it's all these techniques of so this next technique, number 5, I think, 5 through 9, 5 through it's not. Oh, how many was it? 11. I lost track of it. Never mind. But it's gradually moving our mind. Each technique is gradually shifting our mind to turn itself around and eventually get to others are more important than I. So this is the point here. Those words in our culture with our views are too shocking. So unless we've done the wisdom wing, unless we've understood karma, unless we've understood renunciation, unless we've understood delusions, this has no meaning whatsoever. It just sounds like mental illness, like you're demented, like you're mentally ill. So we have to understand the meaning of it, you know, where it fits in all the teachings. So this is where I think after lunch we'll use as a basis of this approach, which is so radical, these 8 verses of, as they call it, the 8 verses of mind transformation. These 8 simple little 4-line verses, seemingly simple, but outrageous, that express this attitude that we're trying to cultivate in our efforts to become a bodhisattva. We'll do that after lunch. Are there any questions? Yes. Use the mic, darling. Use the mic.
This may be after lunch, I'm not sure, but can you speak to the role of Tonglen in the Four Noble Truths?
It's all coming. It's in this whole point. It's in this next lot. It's coming. That's the point. Yeah. Go on. What else? Questions? Mary, anything on the Zoom, sweetheart?
No, Venerable.
Nothing. Okay. Yes. Give the mic, please. Over here. Thank you, darling. Yes.
This example.
Get it close to your mouth.
This
And turn it
example.
on. I think it was not on. Is it on, darling? Press the
Is
button
this
up.
on?
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, good.
I'll speak
Cool.
louder then.
Good, darling.
So I just started to wonder if whether our reliance on like robots or non-human beings to do things for us is
Yeah.
presenting an obstacle for building
Compassion.
compassion. Yeah.
No, it is interesting. That's an interesting point, isn't it? It's an interesting point, isn't it? But I suppose the only way to think there is the people that made the robots. That's at least one road into it. But it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I was even thinking that yesterday about all the, the people who have plastic dolls for girlfriends and things, isn't it? I mean, there's different kinds of ones. I mean, in Japan, it's a big thing, apparently. All these wonderfully constructed dolls with the best looking breasts and best looking vaginas. I don't know if girls have boy dolls. I'm not sure. Or if boys have gay dolls. Maybe they do. I don't know. But they talked about the boys who like girl dolls. And this is their entire partner. They talk this way. And they're robots and they talk to them. And this is the thing about even recently reading about people who using what all the right words are, AI, having them to write their exams for them and writing really good exam answers. So it's sort of like if you've got a doll that talks to you every day, or even having Alexa, she talks to you, doesn't she? If you're lonely, you say, "Hello, Alexa, I'm sad." Probably just a nice word to you. I mean, we're getting a bit schizophrenic in a way, aren't we? And it's weird. I mean, this whole thing of internet and computers and abstract, sort of really, it's kind of really separating ourselves from beings. Just an interesting point. But I think the only way to think about that would be for sure. But sure, yes, it's a symptom of something, isn't it? So the best you can do is when you talk to your robot that someone made it. Okay. Who else, people? Nothing else? Yes. Talk to me.
The other day, I also had an explicative come into the brain,
Something what?
a nasty thought.
Arose in your mind. What was
Yeah.
So don't have to tell us a thought. But never mind.
I don't remember what it
No,
was.
no, go on.
There's many of them, but
So go on.
anyway. So this thing came up and it started to come out my mouth, and I realized it in this moment. And when Om Vajrasattva, Om Vajrasattva, Om Vajrasattva. Is that okay? Or
That's the point, honey child. Come on. Of course, it's wonderful. It's very hilarious. I know. This is it. And this is why I feel, this is the point, isn't it? That this is the thing about, I think, our modern, forget about modern. How we are is that because we're so addicted to our bodies and our senses, we don't know, and because therefore we don't pay attention to the thought processes and the emotions and feelings beneath the body, which is the mind for the Buddha. We don't notice what's happening until it bombs out the mouth. We don't notice we're angry until I want to kill my husband. We don't notice I'm depressed until I'm inert in bed and can't get out. And that's our tragedy. It's a bit like not noticing that your wheels have been wobbling for months, but because you've never paid attention, you only notice when they're coming off at 100 miles an hour on the freeway. That's our biggest tragedy. And that's why I think we wait. In other words, we wait till we're seriously mentally ill before we start to notice. That's why everything's so chaotic and so tragic. So if we could, this is the point with the Buddha's one, if we can start to learn to be conscious, and you're a simple example, and even got to the point of being emotional, when you really learn with concentration to literally just go more deep and more deep and hear the conceptual stories that are there at a much subtler level that we don't notice because we don't pay attention. So that's why we think we're getting worse, but we're not. That's the key skill that Buddha's given us. And so the basic idea is, even if forget about nirvana, okay? But even using this skill to really sincerely become more and more, paying more and more attention every day to what's going on in the mind, we start to see it at more subtle levels. And then we can fix it. We can rectify it. We can use cognitive therapy, to check the thoughts and change the thoughts before they become too painful. And then it's not so difficult. That's why our tragedy is, when you get annoyed when the person slurps their tea, that's a mild event. You don't wait till you want to kill them before you go to the therapist. You work on it at that small level first, and you train yourself. And then you could say you really will be equipped to handle no matter what life brings you, because you've got the mental, you've trained yourself mentally. It's very logical. Do you understand? But yeah, it's a good sign, baby. Well done. Time for lunch. So let's have some lunch. Shall we have some lunch? Dawn and Christopher, I think, have provided lunch so kindly. The centre's offering, but they prepared it. I think it's soup and bread and things, whatever, something simple. Maybe a cookie and something and a cup of tea, right? And we've got 2 hours scheduled, but if we don't need 2 hours, we don't need to take it. But maybe you can use the 2 hours and you can use it. And I really, so not to try and be like holy, you don't have to sit there and speak about all this all the time, but it'd be really good to use the time if you wanted to talk about this stuff. Otherwise, you can talk about the weather. It doesn't matter. You do what you like. Or you be silent, whatever you want. So you Zoom people. So let's aim, shall we, is 2 hours out about right? Unless you really want to go out and don't want to eat lunch here. If you want to eat lunch with everybody else, I think 90 minutes is enough, don't you think? Do you think so or not? What do you think, people? Please answer me. Because you're the bosses here. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Huh? 90 minutes. Okay, people on Zoom, we'll aim for 90 minutes, okay? Yes, people? All right? Are you listening
Thank
to
you,
me?
Venerable.
Can you sort of give me thumbs
Yes, we're
up or
listening
something?
to you.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. So we'll aim for 90 minutes, shall we? Okay. All right. Okay, sweethearts. Enjoy your lunch. And then if you want to chat about this stuff and make it like discussion, you can do what you like. It'll be lovely.